trouble began on a quiet Saturday morning when I looked out across my ranch and saw a stranger kayaking on my lake like he owned the place. At first, I figured maybe a tourist had wandered in. Someone who didn't know better, but as I approached, the man didn't apologize or act surprised to see me. He waved, grinned, and said, "Karen said I could use this any time. We're engaged." Karen. HOA President Karen. I felt my pulse climb. I'd had more than my share of problems with that woman and her petty rules, but this was something else entirely. "This is private property," I said flatly. "This lake is on my land." But he just shrugged, clearly not taking me seriously. What I didn't know at the time, what I would uncover later through legal discovery and a mountain of HOA emails, was that Karen had forged a lease agreement, pretending the lake was community-owned and that she had the authority to gift recreational rights to her fiancé as a wedding present. Within an hour of asking him to leave, she showed up on my property in her pastel SUV, practically screeching tires, phone in hand, shouting that I had assaulted a guest of the HOA and violated lake-sharing Showdown rules. Next thing I knew, the sheriff was pulling up the driveway again. I'd been through this dance before, but this time the stakes were higher. She wasn't just harassing me with citations, she was escalating to legal territory where reputation, rights, and serious money were involved. The sheriff, a younger guy new to the county, clearly didn't know the history. Between Karen and me, he approached cautiously, asked to hear both sides, and, as always, Karen came armed with paperwork, false documents claiming shared ownership of the lake, HOA bylaws twisted out of context, and a fabricated map she'd gotten a shady surveyor to draw up weeks prior. I pulled out the original deed, the real survey filed with the county decades ago, and tried to show him the truth, but Karen kept interrupting, playing the victim with dramatic gasps and claims of harassment. It was all theatre, and I saw the confusion settling into the deputy's eyes. He eventually left without charging anyone, but not before warning me that this situation needs to cool down. What he didn't understand was that Karen was just warming up. Over the next few days, her fiancé returned, this time with a pontoon boat, friends, and a cooler full of beer. They blasted music, tore up the lake bed near the reeds, and left trash floating in the water. I documented everything. Video, timestamps, eyewitnesses. Then came the kicker. Karen issued a statement to the HOA mailing list, claiming that she'd secured public recreational rights to the lake for all residents through a new covenant. When I read that email, I knew this had gone from nuisance to nuclear. She was now falsifying covenants, legally binding contracts on property that wasn't hers, and inviting dozens of people to trespass on land I paid taxes on. It was time to...
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
To trespass on land I paid taxes on. It was time to stop playing defense. I contacted James McCaffrey, my bulldog attorney who had helped me win against the HOA before. And within 48 hours, he'd filed a cease and desist letter addressed to both Karen and her fiancé, citing trespassing, fraudulent misrepresentation of property rights, and intentional defamation of craft ownership. That same day, we hand-delivered copies to her, and I'll never forget the smug smile slipping from her face as James calmly stated, "You're playing with federal-level fraud now." But even after that, the circus didn't stop. She doubled down, claiming James's documents were fabricated and that my deed was under dispute even though it had never been challenged before. The next weekend, she organized a lake day for the HOA, complete with flyers, vendors, and tents set up on the eastern bank on my land. That's when I had to make a choice. Either let this abuse continue, or go for the throat. So, I did something bold. I filed a civil lawsuit seeking $3 million in damages, $2 million for trespassing and violation of property rights, and another $1 million for public defamation and financial loss from what she'd done to Bia. My lake. Within days, it made the local paper, And once the media got hold of it, the tide turned fast. Neighbors who once stayed neutral came forward with Karen's old threats and secret HOA meetings. One man showed me a text where she bragged about owning the lake by proxy through her relationship. It was all evidence, and James compiled it like a prosecutor prepping for trial. But we weren't going to trial yet. First, we were going to court for a temporary injunction to stop Karen and her fiancé from stepping within 200 feet of the lake until the lawsuit was resolved. The courthouse was packed the day of the injunction. Hearing, and Karen arrived, dressed like she was walking into a garden, party-wide hat, floral dress, and sunglasses like a movie star. Her fiancé walked beside her with a fake swagger that practically dripped entitlement. But once inside, James wasted no time presenting our mountain of evidence. He showed the forged HOA covenant side by side with the real land records, played a security video of her fiancé dumping trash into the water, and presented testimony from 3 residents who'd been bra. Told, in Karen's words, "We own the lake now." Her defense attorney tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding and error in interpretation of HOA jurisdiction. But the judge wasn't having it. With a cold stare, he slammed the gavel and granted us the injunction, barring Karen, her fiancé, or any agents or representatives from setting foot near the lake. That meant no boats, no lake parties, no access. I returned to my ranch that day to find my neighbors waiting with applause. It wasn't about me, anymore it was about all of us who'd been bullied by Karen's reign. But Karen wasn't done. Within a week, she called the cops again claiming I had violated the order by installing cameras along the lake perimeter. I showed the sheriff the judge's signed injunction, which clearly gave me the right to enforce my boundary in any legal way. Her complaint backfired and became part of a pattern of harassment. By now, even the sheriff's deputies were tired of being dragged into her lies. One of them, off record, said, "She's losing it." And she was. James had begun the process of filing a motion to freeze Karen's assets, including her HOA retirement account and her personal bank funds, as part of the civil claim. When she was served with that motion, witnesses say she had a full meltdown at the HOA office, screaming that she gave that lake to her fiancé as a gift and that no court could tell her otherwise. Oh, but it could. What Karen didn't know was that James had quietly filed an emergency discovery request and obtained access to internal HOA communications, dozens of emails that revealed a sinister truth. She'd been plotting this lake handover for months.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Sinister truth. She'd been plotting this lake handover for months, using her HLA power to manipulate maps, amend bylaws in secret meetings, and pressure board members into signing off on documents they didn't fully read parade. Worse, she'd funneled HOA funds community money into improvements on the lake, meant solely for her fiancé's benefit, like a boat ramp built under the guise of public recreation access that she privately referred to in an email as Mark's wedding dock. Armed with this evidence, James prepared to amend the lawsuit with allegations of embezzlement and fiduciary abuse, and once that motion hit the court, the press exploded. Local reporters camped outside her home. TV crews replayed clips from our hearing, highlighting the lake map overlay and Karen's outburst. HOA members who once backed her now distanced themselves. A few even contacted James directly to offer statements in exchange for immunity. One elderly board member admitted he signed a resolution Karen claimed was for landscaping, but turned out to be a disguised clause shifting control of the lake path to the HOA, which she then gifted to her fiancé. Every revelation built the public case against her, and while the lawsuit moved through court, the social pressure crushed her remaining credibility. She tried to issue a public statement blaming miscommunication and emotional stress, but nobody bought it. I, on the other hand, kept quiet and let the law do its work. The lake was quiet again. The signs went up, "Private property trespassers will be prosecuted." And the next HOA meeting, it ended in chaos when residents demanded her resignation. She refused at first, then stormed out of the hall crying after someone yelled, "This isn't your kingdom, Karen!" With her fiancé now facing his own lawsuit, he tried to countersue me for emotional damages and got laughed out of court. The dominoes were falling fast. But the biggest one was still to come. The final blow came not in a courtroom or a sheriff's cruiser, but in a packed county commission meeting 2 months later, when James and I presented a formal petition backed by over 300 signatures from local landowners to investigate and dissolve the HOA due to gross mismanagement, corruption, and abuse of power. Karen showed up to the meeting flanked by a worn-out attorney and her visibly nervous fiancé, thinking she could talk her way out with charm and excuses. But this time, there was no room for theatrics. James presented a 30-minute slideshow filled with documented fraud. Fake covenants, misappropriated funds, surveillance footage, testimony from 3 former board members, and forensic audits showing that Karen had approved payments to companies her fiancé secretly owned. Gasps filled the room. Even the commission chair leaned forward, stunned. Then, in a moment I'll never forget, one of the commissioners asked, "Ms. Whitmore, do you have any legal ownership or claim to this lake?" Karen stammered, tried to explain, and finally admitted, "No, but I believed I was acting in the community's best interest." That was all we needed. The vote passed unanimously to freeze the HOA's authority pending full investigation. The following day, her fiancé was served notice of civil charges for trespassing, fraud, and conspiracy to commit property theft. And Karen? She received word from the court that the $3 million lawsuit was moving to trial, with all evidence fully admissible including the forged documents and HOA internal memos. She tried to reach a settlement. We said no. Her public apology fell flat. And within 3 weeks, the court issued a ruling freezing her assets and ordering a lien on her personal property. The house she loved? Gone. The luxury car? Repossessed. Her fiancé left her, packed his things, and tried to vanish. But the damage was done. I stood on my dock, that same quiet lake behind me, watching the last remnants of their arrogance dissolve in the wake of legal justice. What she thought would be a gift of stolen water became her downfall. And as I turned to walk back to the porch, Rufus at my side, coffee in hand, the land was mine again, protected, not just by fences, but by truth, law, and a relentless will to never be pushed around again. 6 months had passed since the court froze Karen's assets, and you'd think that would be the end of it, but trouble has a way of circling back when you're dealing with people like her. After the public fallout, the trial date was set for spring, and while Karen had officially resigned from the HOA, whispers were spreading that she was trying to form a Residential Improvement Coalition, a new title for the same authoritarian nonsense. She was hosting backyard meetings, trying to rally the few residents who still clung to the old HOA system, claiming the county's intervention was unjust and that she'd been framed. Meanwhile, I kept my focus on the land. With the lake fully secured, James and I began working on reclaiming more territory the HOA had falsely marked as common ground. Using a combination of deed analysis, aerial imagery, and county tax maps, we discovered that nearly 17 acres labelled Community Buffer Zone had actually belonged to my late grandfather. Never sold, just omitted from modern surveys thanks to a clerical error decades ago. That was the spark. With that evidence in hand, we filed an expansion claim, and it sent Karen into another tailspin. Even without official HOA power, she tried to file an objection on paper she didn't even have the right to submit anymore. She wrote a 10-page letter accusing me of land grabbing, environmental destruction, and, quote, spiritual desecration of shared waters. The county ignored it, of course, but the letter leaked online and quickly became a meme. People mocked her for spiritual desecration, and someone even painted it on a local food truck. But while the internet laughed, I stayed vigilant. That kind of obsession doesn't die quietly. And sure enough, late one night, trail cams caught headlights approaching the eastern shore of the lake. My security team, which now included off-duty deputies and ex-military neighbors, intercepted a car with tinted windows and found Karen's fiancé inside, parked illegally, drone in hand. He claimed he was just testing new gear, but the footage showed him filming the new boat dock we were building with full permits. We had him cited for trespassing and reported it to the court. The judge ruled it as a violation of the restraining order, strengthening our case. But even more revealing, his drone had saved footage from other locations. Karen had been surveying not just my land, but several neighboring ranches, likely in preparation for another scheme. When James reviewed the drone footage, he discovered clear flyovers of not just my property, but several privately owned parcels along the northern ridge, land that had historically been left untouched due to its rocky terrain and limited access. But it wasn't empty. Karen had started flagging off certain areas with orange survey tape, placing wooden stakes where property lines didn't belong. James reached out to the owners, most of them elderly ranchers, who'd lived quietly for decades and, sure enough, none had given her permission.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Sure enough, none had given her permission. She was trying to fabricate another land use narrative, using fake surveys and drone footage to frame evidence of community access routes. But this time, we didn't wait for her to make her move. James filed a preemptive class action lawsuit with the support of 4 landowners she had targeted, accusing Karen and her now ex-fiancé. Yes, they had officially separated, though still tangled in the same legal mess of conspiracy to defraud multiple property owners. And then came the unexpected twist. A whistleblower. A young man named Tyler, who had worked part-time at the HOA office before it was dissolved, came forward with a hard drive full of internal emails, financial spreadsheets, and private memos Karen had tried to delete before she left office. Buried in those files was a record of every payment she had authorized, including over $40,000 in unauthorized landscaping bill to the HOA for work done on her fiancé's private MNC residence. It also revealed a buried clause in the HOA charter that allowed board members to be held personally liable for misuse of funds under civil tort law. With this new arsenal of evidence, James filed an amended lawsuit, expanding our claims to include personal fraud, malicious intent, and restitution demands totaling $2 million. Karen's new attorney, her third, attempted to negotiate a quiet settlement, but James wasn't having it. "This is about justice," he told me, "not compromise." Meanwhile, I stayed grounded at the ranch. I planted new trees around the lake, repaired old cattle fencing along the south end, and spent more time at the porch with Rufus. It was peaceful again, but I knew the biggest storm was still on the horizon. The federal fraud trial, which had been greenlit after we turned over proof that Karen had submitted forged HOA documents to the BI, County for Permit Approvals. That pushed the case beyond civil and into the realm of criminal proceedings. And when federal investigators got involved, everything changed. The day Karen stepped into federal court, her once polished image was gone. Designer suits, no high heels. No HOA arrogance, just a weathered woman clutching a fraying briefcase, and followed by a public defender who looked equally exhausted. James and I sat at the front, our evidence prepped, and our confidence unshakable. The trial lasted 4 days, but the outcome felt inevitable by the end of the first. The jury saw everything: doctored land surveys, falsified HOA meeting minutes, fake email approvals, misused community funds, and the attempted theft of a lake that never belonged to her. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, the courtroom went silent for a moment, and then the judge sentenced her to 3 years probation, mandatory community service, and full financial restitution. She was barred from holding any leadership position in a neighborhood, HOA, or civic board for life. Her fiancé, already facing his own fraud case, took a plea deal that required him to testify against her and repay $450,000 in damages. And as for the lake, it remained mine, legally reinforced now with not just local but federal backing. I turned the surrounding land into a conservation zone, open for local school visits, outdoor education, and community picnics. The irony? The place Karen tried to seize for herself became a public good under my stewardship. Neighbors thanked me, kids fished off the new dock, and former HOA members wrote me letters of apology. James, now something of a local hero, got offered a spot teaching law at the state university. Rufus still ran the shoreline every morning, arcing at ducks and chasing off the occasional squirrel. And I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise shimmer across the calm lake water, knowing that no matter how hard they tried to take it, my land, my name, and my peace had all been restored. Karen vanished from the headlines, her name now a cautionary tale. But in this quiet corner of the world, her legacy was painted over by resilience, justice, and the unwavering truth that some people just can't be bullied off what they rightfully own.